Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is June 12th, 2015, and the big news, for those who are interested in what's going on in the world, is what's known as the Bilderberg Conference, which is taking place on a mountain in Austria. And it takes place just 1 week after the G7 big conference, which took place only about 16 miles, my understanding is, away on an area on a different mountain in the Alps in Austria. So it's a very secluded, very luxurious hotel. I'm going to show you a video that we are using from InfoWars with David Knight, talking about some of the shenanigans that we know about, which really very little, how the G7 is really just window dressing to attract everyone's attention. All of the major media is focused on the G7, which happens just before Bilderberg. This year, I'm not sure if this happens every year, or if they're just doing it this year, but it seems like a strategy, and he makes reference to this, to give the media all they want of the coverage of G7, which is essentially nothing much going on, but just this meeting. And so you have all these photo opportunities, and then the journalists from the mainstream media are treated like royalty. They are just given all these goodies, lots of free drinks, they get t-shirts, they get nice accommodations. They are just given all the access that they want, and then, but the subject matter is rather shallow. But the real work goes on behind closed doors at Bilderberg, which has an intense lockdown mode with at least 1,000 police officers, not the local police, but a special police force that's used for anti-terrorism in Austria. They wear black uniforms. The local police do not wear black uniforms in Austria, in that part of Austria. I heard that I read somewhere that they wear khaki and look like Boy Scouts, but these are serious looking men and women packing sidearms, and they actually put their hands on their guns to several journalists who were trying to get in, showing at the border or at the checkpoint. And the checkpoints are in a huge circle around Bilderberg, literally miles away from the hotel. So there's this enormous police presence, and there is a sense of intimidation. In fact, direct intimidation. You have visits literally at midnight to various journalists, dragging them out of their, not literally dragging them out of their, but doing these late night checks for no reason particularly. It's pure harassment. Charlie Skelton, who was a journalist for The Guardian, described in detail a kind of scary, very long, well actually he thought it was kind of ridiculous really in a way. He thought it was like some kind of bad movie. He felt like he was in the movie Stalag 17, which is a prison movie from it's a World War II prison movie that's sort of a semi-comedy, I guess, in a way. So they were shining really bright lights on him, investigating his car more than once. So this is a pattern of harassment that goes on at the Bilderberg. And why? Because that's where the real work goes on. It is not a democratic process. It is the world leaders and the leaders of the biggest media outlets on the planet meeting in secret. Even the head of Bloomberg News, the CEO, went to the Bilderberg, yet Bloomberg itself did not report that its own CEO went to Bilderberg. And Bloomberg News it's a media outlet, very big, worldwide. They talked about the meeting, but didn't mention their own CEO. Was actually there at the moment as they were talking about it. And so this is how they do business, and how they decide the fate of nations, and how they decide the future for you and me on taxpayer dollar. We're the ones who are paying for this enormous meeting with the police. We're paying for the police, not them. And the police actually are shown in photos and video actually screening the Mercedes, like these V12 Mercedes, enormous armored black cars, as they're coming into the Bilderberger. And they're trying to keep the journalists from videotaping who is in those cars. Even though their own rules say that the Bilderberg rules say that they're very transparent. Well, that's absolutely not the case. This is how the kings and queens of the planet treat the commoners. They don't feel that they deserve to know what the plans are. And there may be a reason for that. I'm sure there is a reason for that. Because if they did know what they were planning, they would not like it at all. Think about the citizens of Greece. They are waiting to find out what will happen to them, what these people decide, and not one representative from Greece is at the Bilderberg conference. So they don't even get to object if they decide, we're just going to dismember Greece, we're just they can't pay their debts to us, which, we're talking about the World Bank, the IMF, and we know, of course, from reading books like Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that these organizations actually set these countries up for failure with their own people by sending them in and deliberately bribing the leadership through the goodies, and this includes money, prostitutes, whatever that they're into, to accept the enormous loan. They're bribed to accept money. And then the people are supposed to pay back that money with interest. But they can't, because oftentimes the leadership, they're corrupted. They're already probably corrupted. So they take that money and they just, hey, it's free money. Do whatever you want with it. And it doesn't necessarily go in to improve. And money alone doesn't solve problems. And this is what the IMF wants people to think, that money alone can do it. It's not about money so much. It's about actually getting things done. It's about not being corrupt. It's about using funds that you have wisely instead of wasting them. And so this happens over and over and over. And eventually you lose your country because you don't have the money you're so in debt that all you've got is the assets of your country. And that's what they wanted in the first place, of course, is access to the goodies that is waiting for you to grab and plunder. So it's modern day piracy, it's criminality, it's deception, it's fraud. So let's go look at this clip and then we'll go talk about it.
Moving on to Bilderberg, of course, our reporters are there and the mainstream media is starting to talk about it a little bit. Here's a story from Yahoo. Never mind the G7 or Davos, it's Bilderberg time. Now, it looks like they might be understanding what's really going on here, but not really. Here's a quote from Yahoo. They say critics deplore the fact that unlike last weekend's Group of Seven meeting in nearby Bavaria, no press are allowed at Bilderberg, giving rise to accusations of secrecy and suspicions of dishonest goings-on. But organizers say that since the gathering in Telfsbuken last year was in Denmark, they say, is away from prying eyes, it allows those attending to talk freely about hot-button issues of the day. Yeah, move along. There's nothing to see. Just the most powerful people on earth telling you that you can't talk to them, that you can't cover even who is there. Of course, they'll give us their official list, but we can't see who's going and coming there. Now, what kind of important issues would they be talking about? Well, of course, one of those is what's going on in the European Union itself. Greece is trying to come up with something for this Greek tragedy, and as the AP points out, Greece is getting a wake-up call next week, could seal its fate. Do you think they might be talking about that with some of the heads of the largest banks throughout the world, as well as the politicians there? They say the clear message that came out, swiftly tone down your demands in the bailout talks over the next week, or face financial ruin. Yeah, these guys are playing hardball, these bankers who are there. And of course, one of the bankers who's there is Mario Monti. Remember him? Goldman Sachs. He was appointed to be the technocrat in charge of Italy when they were in financial straits. Evidently, the Greeks are not willing to take some Goldman Sachs banker and give him the reins to their government. So it looks like they're going to play pretty hardball with him. They say the IMF took the toughest stance, saying that it was bringing its negotiations back to Washington as there had been no sign of compromise. In other words, you haven't given us what we want, so we're going to take our ball back to Washington. That's some of the types of things that are going to be discussed there at Bilderberg. But, of course, Charlie Skelton, who is there along with our reporters, and he's from The Guardian, he was on the air today with Alex Jones talking about what happened to him. He had a very interesting perspective because he was at the G7. And he said this in today's article at The Guardian. He says, at the G7, we journalists were pampered, but at Bilderberg, we're harassed by the police. He said Bilderberg uses the same security as G7, just on a slightly different mountain. So why don't the lavish state resources extend to allowing free press reporting? And then he gives a personal recount of what happened. He says, back at the G7 summit, barely a day and 20 miles from here, I was treated like a prince. I was one of the chosen 3,000 journalists who were primped, pampered, fed, burped, given free T-shirts, gallons of goulash, buckets of booze, and all the cheesy footage of world leaders we could swallow. We lay back on our branded beanbags and were tickled silly by the gentle fist of the G7 PR machine. But not anymore. The beanbag has burst. And then he quotes these these Austrian police who come out, step out of the vehicle, show me identification papers. A group of Austrian police officers took up position around my car. I pulled on the handbrake, opened the door, and I swear one young officer shifted his hand to the butt of his sidearm like I was about to rush them, all 12 of them, all of them armed. And of course, that's exactly what Josh Owens told us as well. When they got pulled over, the guys are putting their hand on their gun as if they're ready to pull it out and shoot them. We have an article up about an interview that they conducted with him there in Austria, as well as the interview that was today on the Alex Jones Show. Guardian journalist gets midnight raid by Bilderberg police. It didn't stop just with this checkpoint. And of course, what he's talking about in the article and what he talked about in the interviews with us was the fact that he got a midnight visit from the police. They came into his apartment, hung around for 15 minutes. He got tired of them hanging. Maybe he thought if he took off his clothes and took a shower, they would leave. They didn't. They waited. So I guess they were there for about a half hour or so. They're still there. They told him, get dressed when he gets out of the shower. Get dressed. We're going to take you out to your car again. And they inspected his car yet again. Nothing but harassment. So I ask you, what does this tell us about the two different groups? Does it tell us perhaps that at the G7, we've got a lot of essentially powerless figureheads who are doing precisely as they were told? People like John Boehner, bagmen, frontmen, vassals of the multinational corporations that are writing the laws and telling them what to do with these transatlantic, trans-Pacific partnerships with all of these trade agreements. They're the ones who are really, truly in power. The people who are writing these trade agreements are now meeting secretly in Bilderberg. We're not even allowed to know who is in attendance. And of course, they have their own rules. They call it the Chatham House rules. They don't play by our rules. They create their own separate rules, and they get our elected representatives like John Boehner, like Mitch McConnell, to ignore the Constitution, to ignore the legislative process, pretend it doesn't exist, invent a new one so that they can force these trade agreements upon us. That's what's really going on. And when you look at the fact that they want nothing to come out of this meeting, that they come down with an iron fist on everyone who is there, as we've had other reports about how they're jamming cell phone signals, perhaps eavesdropping on cell phones there, this massive security cordon there, that tells you that you are truly at the center of power there and not at that fake PR event that they call the G7.
Okay, well, David Knight does a pretty good job of cluing us in on some of the information that we need to know about this very important international globalist meeting, which, as I mentioned before, takes place every year and started way back in the 1950s, but it was extremely secretive. They were able to keep it secret for decades until maybe 10 years ago. And they were even denying its very existence. And to this very day, there's a certain amount of secrecy, a lot of secrecy on the mainstream media's part. It's not a big deal. But the interesting part of it that intriguing to me is that they have tried or attempted to figure out a way to mask it, even though more and more people are learning about Bilderberg, and that is very simply by the use of that old ploy of the distraction of using the G7 to make the Bilderberg conference kind of an anticlimax that people aren't interested in. This is the old bait and switch kind of thing. These are the deceptions that these people are masters at. That is how they are able to function as a shadow government, a globalized shadow government in our own country, in other countries. And so as a result, most people are left in the dark. And of course, only transparency, only sunshine will prevent these villainous characters from accomplishing their goals. And the strange thing is about them is that since they are essentially damaged personalities, their goals are never truly met. People like this, once you meet your goal, then you just move on to the next goal. You create another goal and another goal and another goal. It never ends. It doesn't stop. That's just simply in their nature to do that. They have competitions among themselves. I'm talking about the world's wealthiest people, most powerful people, to see who can be top dog. They're extremely competitive and ruthless, self-centered, narcissistic, sociopathic, and so they're aggressive against those who are below them, and they're aggressive with each other. And the old story is that, you know, if they will fight all the dogs in the other packs, or the lower end creatures, the weaker creatures, destroy them, and then turn on each other until there's only one in the end left standing. And that would be really, of course, bad for us. That's in a way, that end game is not good either. But that would be probably when the weaker people on the planet would realize that they're being systematically hunted down and destroyed, and that they need to retaliate. And so that then the whole cycle starts over again. You get maybe briefly a little bit of a golden age, an egalitarian world where the big dogs are dragged down and destroyed, and then gradually over time the whole game starts up again with the sociopaths gradually fighting their way to the top, and then the competition between the big dogs starts up again. So this has unfortunately sort of been the history of the planet. And people say, well, if it's been the history that we've known over and over and over again, why do anything about it? Well, we are part of it, and part of that history is that people have struggled against this process, and you are part of the process. So we're trapped on this endless circle, this endless wheel of destiny or fate as a species on this planet, stuck on this planet. Even if you were to go off-world, I'm sure it would continue. You're not going to find some kind of paradise in this world, in this life, in this universe, in which these kind of machinations do not endlessly repeat themselves. I mean, you see this kind of behavior in animals. The top dogs fighting, fighting off the weaker ones, gaining control, and then fighting with each other until there's only one left, until he's finally pulled down himself. I think only a true awareness, a true sense of self-awareness that transcends this behavior is capable of taking the whole, getting ourselves off this wheel, because people are tied to the wheel where your whole life. You can't get off it unless you find out that it's all just part of the illusion. It's all, even though it seems very real, and it is very real, but it is also an illusion to believe that it's real at the same time. So it's real and it isn't real. And people have to understand that this is the way the universe works, is you have the reconciliation of opposites as a requirement. Contradictions, if we can't see that both can exist at the same time, then you're stuck. You need to be able to understand and see and have awareness, and it becomes a physical awareness. It's very real. It's like splashing cold water in your face. It's not an idea of splashing cold water on your face to wake you up, but it is actually doing it, actually really splashing cold water on your face, not writing a book about it, not giving a lecture about it, not thinking about it, not talking about it, but actually doing it. That makes the difference. And you could say, well, the water is just an illusion too. But at some point, we have to accept that this is a reality that we live in, and we just have to go on from there and then just appreciate what has been given to us as living beings, and allow those forces that work on us and are very much in control of our lives, those unseen forces, eternal forces, to operate as they naturally would operate. I would say beneficially. They're beneficent. So it is possible to appreciate and enjoy and be grateful simply because we are alive. For no other reason. No adjuncts, no additions, no baggage on us at all required, but just the mere fact of existence itself can be a fulfillment. I mean, yes, we do have basic requirements that need to be met, but not as a number one, not as a priority. That would be, the first priority would be to acknowledge and feel a gratitude for the life that we have. And then other needs, once we're there, then it's sort of like the universe is like, yeah, okay, this person gets it, you know, let's help them along. The universe is not a static non-entity that's not living, but we're a part of the universe, and there are amazing magical things that can happen to us if we allow them to happen, and in which our basic survival needs are met. And of course, yes, we will all be ushered out of existence at some point when our time comes. That's inevitable, and that would make room for other beings, other lives to manifest in the universe, and the events to roll on in the amazing way that things do. And this is where maybe the essence of the sickness comes into play of those in power, because one of their major goals, maybe the major goal of those in power, the sociopaths, is to get themselves in a position in which they are in control. Remember, they're control freaks, so that they can beat the universe at its own game, which would be the control of life and death. They want to cheat death and live forever. And you might say, well, how could they possibly do that? Well, they think they have a plan. And Ray Kurzweil is sort of the high priest of this new religion, which worships technology, science, as the new God that will, for those who can afford it, for those who are well positioned and connected, for those who are the chosen few, they will have the chance to live forever. And how would they do that? They would do that by essentially downloading or uploading their thoughts, personalities, memories, everything, the contents of their brain, essentially. First they would be digitalized and then transferred to an artificial being that was created by science that would be immortal, and because when a part wore out, they could be replaced. Now, science is working very hard to actually achieve that with organic matter. I just saw an article last week about the leg of a mouse that was actually, I believe it was a mouse or rat, that was actually created in a laboratory. And they showed a picture of this little leg. You know, don't ask me how they did it, but they're gaining the ability to build bodies or body parts from cells, and just as, I guess, the same way that a woman would create, or a woman's body would create a new life out of a single cell or group of cells, the zygote, create a fetus, and then ultimately create a human being out of nothing. And they actually figuring out a way to harness this technology to target arms, legs, organs, and so that I'm assuming that they could create an enormous, a whole human being or human parts. Well, you know about the cloning, of course. The science fiction writers have talked a lot about clones, written a lot about clones, but And like the idea that a person, the identical person, could be grown from the cells of a living person, let's say a rich banker who wants to live forever, and that clone could be kept in a state of suspended animation as a young body that was cloned, and then the banker, when he gets old and he's about to die, all his thoughts and his personality is transferred into this clone, and that's the way he gets to live forever. Unfortunately, that could never work, because the clone has its own personality, its own consciousness, even if it is in a comatose state, as long as it's alive. So you would have this situation in which I guess the consciousness, the awareness of the clone would be overwritten by the consciousness of the rich, dying banker. Well, that's not going to work either. But so you can see, I mean, there's no possible way. No possible way, because the essence of who we are as human beings is not something you can digitalize, because it's not physical. By its very nature, is not physical. There are scientists like Ray Kurzweil and other people who are looking for consciousness. What is consciousness? And that's a big question. What is consciousness? Who are we? What is the essence of who we are? People like Deepak Chopra have been fighting with these guys for a while, because he says that consciousness is not physical, and that the consciousness is what runs the show. The brain does not run the show. And the consciousness is not only in the brain, but it's throughout the entire body. And so the awareness, it's self-awareness. The brain is just a tool to store information gathered by the consciousness. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I understand exactly how it works, but I think we can rest assured that those people who run the show now, run the planet now, and we're essentially at that place where global governance is a fact, and it simply has not uncloaked itself yet, using a Star Trek terminology. And so most people don't understand it. They still are thinking in terms of Democrats and Republicans, or in the UK Tories and Liberals and Labour, the various parties. Only, I mean, for the mainstream politics, people like Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush, who are the most likely contenders for the presidency in 2016, they're essentially the same. They're the same, they have the same outlook. The Clinton families and the Bush family are very close. The George W. Bush and Bill Clinton are like this. They're like buddies, like brothers. And George W. has actually said that he feels like Hillary is his sister-in-law. It's just remarkable and amazing and frightening that these would be our possible two options. Now, on the interesting side, both Hillary and Jeb seem to be having some issues about whether or not people will be willing to vote for either one of them. my understanding is that on the Republican side, Rand Paul is much more popular among the rank and file Republicans than Jeb Bush. Who in the name of heaven would ever want to vote for Jeb Bush is beyond me. We've already had 2 Bushes as president. We do not need a third. And remember, this is the guy that used his political pull to stop that crucial vote count in Florida in 2000 when he was governor, that kept that made George W., his own brother, president. I mean, how crooked is that? I mean, it's very possible that Al Gore would have been our president. Now, would that have changed things? I don't know, because Al Gore has proven himself to be an untrustworthy player over and over again in a lot of different ways. You know, it's just so hard to say. I almost now go by the idea of who kills the most people. And it seems like to me Republicans kill a lot of people. I mean, I don't think Obama has killed as many people as George W. did. Not even close. Not even close. We're talking in the I think in the millions with George W. Over 1 million. 1.5 million, 1.2 million deaths directly attributed to the policies of the second Bush administration. The first Bush administration killed a lot of people too. Now, all administrations kill people. I guess it's just comes down to the numbers. How many people would Hillary Clinton kill? No way of knowing. No way of knowing. And I know the way that the American mindset supposedly works is after 8 years of one party, they are ready for the opposite party. They're tired of the one party. And they want to give the other party a chance at the presidency. So, does that mean that Jeb Bush will become president? I don't know. Is it possible that somebody like Rand Paul could actually become the Republican candidate? Or Bernie Sanders become the Democratic candidate? You know, there's so much that's up to the big boys, the money people, the Wall Street guys. They're, in a way, more and more, unfortunately, the people who make those decisions about who the candidate will be. And the big guys on top, they own both candidates, so they don't almost even care who gets. If you think about it, if you were in that position of having access to unlimited power and money, and you wanted to keep the illusion of a democracy going, what would you do? Wouldn't you do the exact same thing? Just simply try to get control of both parties, contribute in a major way to both parties, Republicans and Democrats. Hedge your bets. That's just common sense. And that's what a lot of these guys do behind the scenes. They may want you to think that they're only rooting for one side. That's to keep up the illusion of the two-party system, that the Democrats and Republicans are really different and they're clashing about these major issues like should gays be allowed to marry or shouldn't they be allowed to marry, or should abortion be this legal or should abortion be this legal, or not legal, or completely legal, or somewhere in between. And let's talk about this. And let's make this a national discussion that goes on for years talking about this. And meanwhile, the real important issues, they don't get a lot of coverage. The issues that really affect most people, instead of small group, are about pensions, they're about jobs, they're about housing, they're about savings. They're about civil rights, about free speech, about the Constitution. They're about also wars, foreign policy. Wars do affect the American people because every time there's a war, a lot of young men and women sign up because they're fooled by the media, they're fooled by their leadership into believing that this is going to do something good for the United States, for humanity, for women, maybe, for children, for old people, for Christians, that it will actually help them in some way to go to this war. It will help them, it will help their children, their grandchildren. The future of the world is at stake. Democracy. It's about democracy. We have to fight for democracy. We have to establish democracy. Get rid of tyrants. And this is so basic. This is drawing on a primal energy source. People value freedom. They love freedom. They crave freedom when they don't have it. The ability to live your life without interference, without major interference by people who are trying to rob from you, take your stuff, turn your family inside out, break up your family, change you in some way, change your religion, run the show. That's what they think of as democracy. Democracy and freedom are linked. In people's minds by a lifetime of propaganda that is, I suppose you could say somewhat it's true. The republic, we live in a republic. It's not a direct democracy. It's a representational democracy. Whether or not it's real, I think that there's too many shenanigans that go on. And I have to think back to when Barack Obama was vying for the candidacy way back in 2012. And he was wanting to be the candidate, and one of his rivals was Hillary Clinton. And amazingly, and I've talked about this before, amazingly, on that first primary, she won that primacy, that primary in New Hampshire. And the pundits had saying that Barack Obama was on track to win. Then they did exit polls after people voted in the primary, and they said, well, Barack Obama has got it. But then they actually counted the votes, and they said, wow, Hillary won. This goes against the exit polls. This has never happened before. Because the exit polls are extremely accurate. Why? After people have already voted, why would they lie to you and tell you they voted for someone else? They have no motivation to lie. The people are standing out there, do you mind telling us who you voted for? I voted for so-and-so. I voted for Barack Obama. But amazingly, and going against everything that logic and common sense dictates, Hillary Clinton won. Well, why? Because she cheated. She stole the primary in New Hampshire. This is Hillary Clinton. This is the way she works. There's been a lot of other things that have happened. This is just one of them. Black box voting nailed her on this. And this is a nonpartisan watchdog group, Black Box Voting. They followed the van that had the votes, the ballots in it, and they saw there was definite shenanigans that went on in that van while they were following it. And when it came out, the fix was in. When the van arrived at its destination, the fix was in. You can watch it. I'm assuming it's probably still on YouTube. It's pretty clear what happened. This is the only logical and sensible thing, because those exit polls are extremely accurate. And I remember hearing the talking heads mention this, and they were going, gosh, you know, do you suppose maybe that we shouldn't rely on exit polls to make predictions about who won elections? And they go, gosh, well, all right, I don't know. Maybe we should. Maybe we shouldn't rely on them. And the person goes, do you think maybe that's what people will do? And he goes, I doubt it. I doubt if they will stop relying on them. Even though they just had evidence that they're not reliable, they did not believe that the mainstream media would stop relying on exit polls. And what do they know that they're not talking about? That they would be so sure that, oh yeah, we'll continue to rely on exit polls. This is just an aberration, you know. This is, they're not going to say that it was fraud, it was cheating, it was illegal. So yeah, I mean, this is what we have to consider when we think about voting for Hillary Clinton. What does the future hold? Unless Americans can shine a bright spotlight, as bright as the spotlight that the Austrian police shined on Charlie Skelton when they were investigating, when they were looking at his car, when they were shaking him down numerous times, then they will continue to operate in the shadows with impunity. They will make their backroom deals. They will run the show for 99.9% of the people on the planet. They will literally decide who will live and who will die in many cases. Which countries will be bombed, which countries will bomb them, which countries will fail, which countries will benefit as they move their agenda forward, with, you know, all moving from the top down, command and control, enormous pyramid, trilateral commission at the top, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, as a tool of their agenda. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is an example. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is just one important piece of an enormous global plan that will help to destroy national sovereignty and personal sovereignty, individual sovereignty, by taking the ability of ordinary citizens to make important decisions about their own lives, in other words, to vote, out of their hands. Those decisions will be more and more made for them by very distant small groups of men, who unelected, who they will not be able to get their hands on. They will be out of reach. They will be too well protected to be able to stop doing what they're doing. The people of Europe are suffering under this, because you're in Greece, but the decisions that are going to affect you personally are being made for you in Belgium. And that's all the way across on the other side of Europe. And Belgium, of course, is the capital of the EU. And not the country, but the capital of Belgium, Bruges, is how the French pronounce it, I believe. Brussels is how the English pronounce it. And they have this huge building in the middle of Brussels that's the center of the EU, and it's kind of intimidating. It's not a pretty building like a lot of the buildings are in Brussels. It's not an old building. It doesn't seem to even fit. It's like it's dropped down from the 22nd century or something into the middle of this ancient European city, very pretty, fancy, Baroque architecture. And that's where these guys meet, and they're making, you know, they're having their meetings and making their decisions about the future. They would like to have this happen in the Pacific, in the Asian Rim, or the Pacific Rim, all the way around, all the countries bordering the Pacific. That's what the Trans-Pacific Partnership is all about. And the United States borders the Pacific. We're a major player in this so-called trade partnership, which they're trying to pretend is good for the American people, but is actually not, for the most part, except for a very few people at the top. It's good for them. It's good for the wealthy, but not for ordinary folks. And so you have a situation in which mostly Republicans are supporting this fast track to get this bill passed, Trans-Pacific Partnership. They're supporting Obama. Obama, his own party, most of them are against it. The Democrats are against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Why? Because they're allied with the unions who are against it. The unions see the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a threat to their members because they see that as taking away their sovereignty, their ability, their strength as unions to call the shots, to protect their members, to get raises for their people. This is just, this is a pumped up version of NAFTA and GATT, and of course this is part of the Trilateral Commission's plan to get basically the world divided into three major zones, or five major, maybe it's five major zones, and then eventually coalesce those zones into one global zone. And that would be, so you have the Asian zone, the European zone, the North American and South American zone, and African zone. One of the stumbling blocks, of course, is Russia, because Russia is not fully on board. It doesn't see how this is necessarily a good deal for them. Russia, as the former rival to the United States for global domination, and struggling, a country struggling to get that prestigious, powerful position back, they don't necessarily go along with the agenda. And this is why some people think that the world is the United States, the Western powers, the EU, NATO, are trying to align themselves in a position that they can neutralize the threat posed by an expanding and growing economic power and military and social power that is Russia, the new Russia, the old Soviet Union. You have a strong leader like Putin who is acting very much like the old tyrannical leaders of the old Russia, of the Soviet Union, restricting free speech and so on, jailing or murdering journalists who criticize his administration, while concentrating power to himself and staying in power longer than was expected. Really, Putin should have been long gone, but the fact that he's still in power, that's very scary. Once you get a country associated with one man, this is the definition of tyranny almost, because they tend to concentrate more and more. It's like if Barack Obama would announce that he was going to remain as president because, let's say, of just an emergency situation. We have to cancel the elections because this awful thing has happened. And it's just the country is in chaos, and the last thing we need is to have the chaos and the confusion of an election cycle. So we're just going to forget about that for now. We're going to delay it until we can regain control of the country. A lot of people think that this is what's more or less going to happen. Maybe starting as soon as September or even June or July of this year, where some major event is going to disrupt life as we know it in the United States, like maybe a nuclear weapon going off in a major American city, and they could say, well, the terrorists did it, or a domestic terrorist did it even, or maybe ISIS did it. And then they say, we're putting the whole country on lockdown. We're going to martial law. The terrorists are here among us. They are a threat and a clear and present danger, and we're going into lockdown mode. So all of a sudden, the military is activated, and who are the threat? The American people are the threat. So you have military and police combining. We have the militarized police, and we have the military who are acting more and more like police, and so they simply join forces, and you have an overarching, enormously powerful force with military weapons brought back from the wars in the Middle East. We know that the federal government has sold or given police departments around the country numerous heavy weapons like MRAPs. They're hardened against bombs and bullets that they could deploy if they felt it was necessary. In fact, some police departments are using them in an almost silly way to try to supposedly increase the security of the local population. These small towns who have almost no crime, and then they're using these big military weapons to essentially get kittens out of trees that are stuck up in trees, and they're bringing up an MRAP or something to get the kitten out of the tree. So we have to consider that. We have to look at what could be coming down very soon. We may be having something very soon, maybe in about a week, here in Ohio, because of indications that actors are being for some kind of event, some kind of a huge drill. Now, whether that will turn into a terrorist attack, I don't know. So that's all there is for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well.